So you want to try ice dye tie-dye, but you don't know whether to put the dye on top of the ice or on bottom. Well, you're in the right place, because today we're going to talk about how to ice dye tie-dye. We're going to talk about top and bottom ice dye and when to use which. I am Dyeverse Designs, aka living for the better good of all. That's my passion, my mission in life, what I live to do. So in today's video, let's start by talking about what are the differences that come out in the results between top dye ice dye and bottom dye ice dye. Well, when you top dye ice dye, when you put the dye on top of the ice, the dye will melt down around the ice and it'll give you dark outline of the ice cube, and then it'll bleed toward the center of that outline. So you'll have something very dark on the outside of each area that it dripped around an ice cube, and a very light area on the inside of it. If you do bottom ice dye, wherever you have direct contact with the ice will get the dark dye, and wherever the ice may have been a little lifted up because it wasn't laid out flat, that'll trickle down, so you'll get a lighter color in there, kind of like the picture on the right. If you look at the upper left part of the concentric circles, that's kind of the idea of what happens with bottom dye for any area that doesn't have a direct flat contact with the ice. This picture can give you a little better example. So if you imagine laying the dye on the top of this ice, as the dye, because the dye is much warmer than the ice, it melts the ice, and as it does, very concentrated dye runs down the outsides of the ice cube and down through the little nooks and crannies, and when it lands, it's a very concentrated dye, so it's very, very dark and it bleeds its way outward. Thus you get very light areas inside of these dark, squiggly, kind of circly areas. Let me give you a few examples. This is actually my very first ice dye tie-dye just over a year ago. And if you look down at the bottom line of red that looks kind of flamish, that's actually the second line across going up. If you look in there, everything that went around the ice is a very dark red, whereas it bled its way into like an orange and yellow where the ice was actually covering the shirt. Give you a couple more examples. Here's another example, one of my early Phoenix efforts, and then I just did all scrunch at the bottom, but you can see by the scrunch at the bottom, you see a lot of dark areas with a lot of light inside them, and that's the type of result that you get. Again, here's another example. This is a pretty good example of how you get the darker on the outside and the lighter on the inside. This is an example of what happens when you use bottom dye on a scrunch. It does not come out well. It wouldn't have mattered if I had better colors. Because of the fact that the dye is lying flat on the shirt, it tends to be much darker with the light around the outside, which really doesn't lend itself well to the scrunch patterns. In fact, I'll get into that. Might as well get into that now. The top dye is primarily going to be used for your scrunch patterns, and that's pretty close to it. Anything that you want something vague and very obscure or abstract, that type of item is the type of item that you would do a bottom dye on, which is what this one was. Bottom dye is really better used for any of your pleat folds, your fan folds, or your emblem patterns. The reason being because when that ice is applied, it's going to give you much darker uniform colors right where you applied the dye. And in a V pattern, you want that V pattern to be solidly showing, so you really need to do your dye in that particular manner. Here's a better example of a pleat fold or fan fold, almost like a V pattern. But you can kind of see this was a bottom die, and bottom dies are going to give you a very different result. You're going to get a much more uniform color across the actual flat part of your pleat or your fan fold. And the same thing goes with your emblems. Your emblems, because you want a very defined area, anything you want very clearly defined, you want to do the bottom die. Now, the other thing we'll talk about is balance of color, especially when we're talking about top die and scrunch type patterns. It gets very difficult to realize exactly what part of the shirt each area is once you get it all tied up, bound up in either cardboard or something like I use here from Home Depot. It's an under the door garage sealer. It's supposed to keep water out from under garage doors. It's like a piece of rubber that just is amazing to use as kind of a border for when you put the ice on. Once you get it in this bundle though, it gets really hard to remember where you are in the shirt. So you really need to develop your spatial relation skills so that you're really aware. Like in this, if you look how that curls around in toward the center, at that very end point in the center, right underneath of that, that's an actual diamond emblem there. Which means that everything going down, curving around to the right, is going to be the area from where the emblem would be going up toward the throat area. And then everything all the way going up on the right would be my area going up toward the collar. Then I would be going from the collar to the sleeve as I go around from, like, say maybe 11 o'clock to 2 o'clock. If you imagine this as a clock, from 11 o'clock to 2 o'clock would be roughly from the corner of the shoulder down to the end of the sleeve. And I'd also have to remember that the area on the inside of this is all of my center of my front and back of the shirt. And the outside portion of this is all of the very sides of the shirt, like where my hips would be. So I need to keep that in mind because you need balance when it comes to these scrunch patterns. I know you see people that look like they're just willy-nilly doing it, but trust me, I can tell you, you're not going to get a result like this just going willy-nilly. So there's a couple ways that you can kind of do it. One way is you can just kind of balance, alternating, on the left and right sides of the shirt. Your colors, as you add different colors, you kind of mix them in. Now you can do it one of two ways. You can either do it in what I call the blotch way, where you just pick little spots and you just add different colors to each little spot. Or you can do it the stripe method. This is the stripe method where I just striped the lines right across. This was not a stripe method. This was where I actually placed the die in specific spots. And I did try to offset the balance of where I put my greens, where I put my raspberry in this particular case. Even though it was a blotch, I did larger blotches. And in this example, here again, another one of the top dies. That's my last tip for these. Hopefully this video really helped you. Let me know in the comments, or if there's something else that you'd like to see. Because I can tell you, I'm doing this whole thing for you guys. I live for the better good of all. I use every talent I have to try to help people, lift people up, be a positive energy in this world. And I can tell you, there's nothing in the world that feels better than when I do something good for somebody else. I'd love to give you that feeling right now. In a few seconds, there's going to be a green tie-dye t-shirt inside of a circle between two videos. please click that subscribe button for me. It's not for my vanity. It's not to get monetized. I just want to get my search rankings up higher. If I can't get seen, I can't get the good stuff out there, you'll be helping me. You'll be helping the people that I can reach. It's a win-win situation for everybody. Go ahead, you'll feel great. Go ahead and click that button. Until then, I am Dyeverse Designs. You can reach me at dyeversedesigns@yahoo.com. That's Dyeverse Designs. I'd love to hear from you, and I am living for the better good of all, and I hope you are too.